Okay, so did you guys use the app?
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
Didn't work?
Well, yeah, when you sent me like that code and stuff, mine didn't work.
Well, it was the code didn't work?
Yeah.
Did you put the quotes in there?
Oh no.
Well, there's not supposed to be quotes in there, but
Oh.
it should have worked. Yeah. Okay, so it's the second week, right? What did I say about the second week?
It's gonna be hard.
Yes. So that's the bad news, right? The bad news is that this week is like the week, right? First week was kind of like warm-ups. It's kind of get you familiar with, how to use Xcode, how to, Swift. This week it's about like the concepts, like the abstract kind of core concepts, and you know, and everything on the exam is going to be from this week, right? And maybe from last week, because it's just like carried over. But if you can do well in this week, you can probably take the exam over the weekend. You'll still pass, right? The stuff that we're doing next week is extra, so that's kind of like the good news, right? The good news is that even though this is hard, we still have a lot of time, right? So the way that this curriculum is focused, it's designed to kind of give you guys a lot of time to kind of let the core concepts sink in so that you can build a strong foundation from which you can then go on your own tangent, right? Because in iOS there's just so many things, there's so many frameworks, so many different hardware stuff that it's impossible to teach all of that to you guys in 3 weeks. So they focus on the main concepts that I feel like it's a pretty good foundation, because I knew zero about iOS and I did this program and now I'm able to build apps where it's actually like being useful, right? So cool. All right, let's before we start, I want to kind of I wrote out this little document here and we are going to just quickly go over it. All right, so we're going to talk about the plan for the day and then the plan for the week, and then we're going to go into the lecture. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the platform, iOS Intermediate now. Right? If any of you guys are still stuck, if you're still working through the basic stuff and you don't feel like you have a good understanding of the basics, I want you guys to focus on the basics, right? But if you're working on, can you close the door? If you're on the basics section and you feel like you understand how to use Xcode and drag and drop like the actions and the outlets and stuff like that, and you're kind of stuck on like the tipster or the tic-tac-toe where it's really mundane, right? And it's a lot of like algorithm stuff. If you're stuck on that and you feel like you have a good understanding of basics, just move on to the intermediate. If you're not up to tic-tac-toe yet, then work until you get to tic-tac-toe. Once you're at tic-tac-toe, don't spend more than like 2 hours on it. If you do, then it's kind of overkill. But I want you to have a good understanding of how to use Xcode before you go on to the intermediate section, which will assume that you know all of that info already, right? Okay, so today we're going to get started on table views. The end of the day goal, right, is the bucket list refactor. So this guy, all right? So for bucket list refactor, once you finish, this is kind of like a, they teach you table views and they kind of do this like big example of the bucket list, right? I'm going to kind of do a little bit of that today as well with the lecture. Once you build out the basic bucket list, there's an assignment called bucket list refactor. And this assignment, when I was going through the platform, it confused me a lot, right? And in the end of the day, it really is like 5 minutes worth of typing to finish the assignment. So if you are stuck on this assignment for more than half an hour, just come to me and be like, hey, you know what? I've been working on this. I don't get it, right? And I can either show you how to do it or I'll send you my code and you'll look at it and be like, oh, duh, right? Okay? So don't struggle too hard on this one, but allocate like 30 minutes for you to kind of try to figure it out yourself, okay? So that's going to be the goal for the end of the day today, right? Tomorrow, we're going to get into core data. The core data lecture is very short. Core data is very, very simple, right? It's literally, it's just like, here's this code to save some stuff. Here's this code to edit some stuff. Here's this code to start it. And that's it, right? it's I'll get more into this tomorrow, but core data, it's nice to have. It's not one of those things you'll use a lot, and you'll find out, like I did. Well, I found out the hard way that if you only rely on core data to build out your app, you're eventually going to have to migrate all of that to external database, because core data only lives on people's phones, and it's very limiting, right? Even though it's easy to use and it's easy to kind of start building on. But core data will be on the exam, so that's something that you will need to know. Wednesday, so for Tuesday, custom cell is the end of day assignment, right? So it's this one. And then for Wednesday, it's error handling, which is basically everything else. And if you have time, Mike Dogs is a good one. It's an optional assignment. Difficulty level hacker, right? So that's a challenge. But after that, on Thursday and Friday, it's like it's going to be work days, right? Catch-up days. So even though the pace is quick, right, and it's designed like that so that you go through it quickly, and we can catch some of the pain points for you guys, and kind of like give you guys demos and extra material to help you with that, depending on what you get stuck on. But Thursday and Fridays can be work day. If you're done on Thursday, then I have a special assignment for you. It used to be a group thing, but I want to give it to you individually, because when it was a group thing, I felt like it wasn't as productive, because people were spending more time just kind of like working out the dynamics of the group and GitHub and all that stuff. But it's a special assignment, kind of like taking into account all of the different concepts that you learned, incorporating some photos into it. It was actually the kind of the basics of how I started the Algo app. It's built on top of that assignment. And then on Friday, it's an optional hackathon. If you're done with everything and you have nothing else to do, I'm going to give you a starter kit for core location, and then you can feel free to play around with that. There's not going to be any judges or anything. It's really just to kind of let you play around with it. Okay. Cool. Any questions on that? The agenda for this week. All right, we're good? Cool. Okay. So let's get into table views. All right. Table views are one of those things where it sounds weird, but every single app that you download is some type of table view. And as you work through this, you're gonna kind of start appreciating how clever Apple is by making these table views work so well. There's a lot of little Apple magic going on in the back to make it look so seamless, to make it feel so seamless, right? So I think the best way to kind of go about this lecture is to kind of create this project and kind of talk through it as I'm making it. Right? So we're going to make a new project, single view application. We're going to call it Table View Lecture May 15. Save it on desktop. All right. So we have our view controller here, right? And we have our view controller code, right? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this bucket list view controller. And I'm going to change that name, and I'm going to change it here as well. I'm going to change it here as well. All right, so this is a bucket list view controller now. In the main storyboard, I'm going to make this guy a bucket list view controller, right, to match the class that I made for it. Okay, so let's talk about data source and delegates, right? So if say I'm going to make a table view for this view controller, I type in table view down here, and I'm going to drag a table view up here, right? I'm just going to make it, kind of the full width of the screen, like that. Okay, and then I'm just going to give it some basic constraints. I'm just going to constrain it to the edges. Okay, so that's good. Now, the first thing you do when you create a table view is you assign it a data source and a delegate, both on the storyboard and in your code, right? So I'm going to do it in the storyboard, and there's different ways you can do it. There's about like 3 or 4 ways you can do it, right? So one way to do it is just click on the table view, click on the little arrow thing with the connections, and you'll see data source and delegate here on top, right? So you can drag this plus sign, control drag it to the view controller like that to assign the data source and a delegate, right? So I connected those two, right? They're hooked up. Now, another way to do it is to just drag the table view directly to this guy and give it a data source, delegate like that. See, it's connected as well, right? And another way you can do it is just through here, you can do this as well. All right, so there's many ways you can do it, but the idea is that we want the data source and a delegate to be hooked up to this table view. And it's going to be connected from this table view to the view controller that's containing it, okay? So I've done that in my storyboard. Now I need to do it in my code, right? So what controller is this? It's a bucket list view controller, right? So we go to the bucket list view controller and we tell it that you are a UI table view delegate. And then you are a UI table view data source. Okay? Now, I'm not sure why it didn't autocomplete for me, but that's fine. Okay, actually that's not fine. I'm gonna delete this. I'm gonna close it because sometimes Xcode is buggy like that. So I'm just gonna close it and I'm gonna reopen this file again. All right, I'm gonna do Command B to build. And then I'm gonna do UI. There we go. Table view delegate. All right, make sure that it autocompletes for you. UI table view data source. Right? So we tell the view controller that it's gonna be a delegate and data source for the table view. Right? And once you do that, it's gonna give you this little error here.
Do you have to do Command B to build?
Command B, it kind of builds the project, so it reintegrates everything.
Oh, okay.
If something is not like connecting or it's not like loading, you Command B to make it build. Okay. So when you click on the play, it builds and then runs it. So Command B just builds and doesn't run it. Okay. So once you write these two things on the top here, it's going to give you this error, and it's going to say type bucket list view controller does not conform to protocol UI table view data source. Right. What that means is that you say that you are going to be a delegate, but I don't see that you have the functions to actually do this, be that thing. Right. You don't have the ability to be that thing. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to create protocol functions, and I'm going to be more explicit and just name it table view protocol functions. Okay, like that. So the two mandatory functions that you must implement, the first one is called, and I don't memorize this, but if you simply type in table, it's going to give you a list of all the different functions that you can implement because you are that role. Now, if I didn't have these two things up here, when I type in table, I wouldn't get this, right? Because I imported it up here already, I get this, and I can just choose from it, right? So the two mandatory ones are going to be self for row at index path, or number of rows in section. I think I passed it. There, number of rows in section. And right now, it's asking me to return an integer. I'm just going to return 0. Okay, so it doesn't give me any error messages. Second one, and this one is pretty much asking me how many rows are there in your table view. Okay, and this one is asking me what does each table view cell look like. Okay, so I need to tell it I need to answer these two questions for it to, actually function. So the next one is going to be cell for row at index path, right? And it's right down here. Okay, this guy is asking me to return a table view cell, right? So before I can give it this, I am going to go back to my storyboard. I'm going to click on the table view. I'm going to open the side thing here, and I'm just going to make this a little bigger, right? And I'm going to go down to this one, and it's going to, right here, it's going to say prototype cells, and I'm going to make it 1, All right. If I make it 1, I'm going to see one prototype cell come up, right? So each prototype cell is kind of like each type of cell that you want to show. So if you see, if you download the Word app, you'll see like white boxes and then black boxes and different kinds. Each of those is a different prototype cell, right? So for all the assignments here, we're all going to be working with just one prototype cell. So you make it 1, and when you click on the cell over here, there's a reuse identifier, and we're going to give it a name, right? We're just going to name this my cell, right? That's the name I like to give it. Doesn't really matter. So we're going to name this cell my cell. Okay. So when we go over here, we can create that cell. We can get it from the reuse pool. So we're going to create a constant. We're going to just name it cell. We're going to say you are a table view dot DQ reusable cell with identifier, right? This guy. And the identifier is going to be my cell, and the index path is going to be this argument that was passed in, right? So it's just index path. Okay, so now that we have that, we can return cell. All right, if we do that, then everything should be looking good, and the error should be gone, right? If I run the code, everything should be working just fine. But there should be 0 things in my table view because I said here, return 0 for 0 rows, okay? Okay, so here, let's create a fixture, right? And a fixture is just some, dummy data that we pretend that this data was from some backend, right? So if you work at a company and you have front-end developers and back-end developers, the front-end developer might say that, hey, you know what? I'm going to make this new feature. I'm going to make this API call. I'm going to expect back some data in JSON format, and this is what it's going to contain, like a first name, last name, whatever it is, right? The back-end guy says, writes that down and says, okay, I'm going to start working on it. And the front-end guy doesn't wait for the back-end guy to finish. The front-end guy just makes up his own data in the exact same format that he gave to the back-end guy. So he's pretending that he got this from the back-end, so he can start building his stuff without the back-end guys finishing, right? So when they're done, they just replace that fixture with the real data, and everything still works the same. Okay, so we're going to create a fixture here. By that, we're going to create a variable, right? We're going to create a variable called, my list, and it's going to be an array of some strings, right? So what do we do, for our bucket list, right? We do algos, then we do lecture, and then we do lunch, and then work. Okay, so that's my list. Now, instead of returning 0, I can return the count of this list, right? So here we can say it's going to be my list.count. That's the number of rows I have. And for each cell, I'm going to make the title this string, right? So we can do cell dot text label dot text equals to my list of index path dot row. The index path dot row is which row you're on in the table view, which corresponds to which row, which index, in this array I'm looking at. Okay, so if we run this, we should see a table view with those 4 things listed. There we go. See? Now, I kind of want to really just kind of briefly touch on the magic that goes on here, right? As you can see, using this code here, we just created a very simple table view, and it's really easy. It's pretty straightforward. But what really goes on, what does all this stuff mean, right? Reuse cell, DQ reuse cell, the identifier of my cell, what does that have to do with anything, right? So the way that it works, and admittedly, I don't understand completely how it works, but I know like generally how it behaves, right? So in the beginning, when Apple came out, with the iPhone, one of their biggest problems was that you had these apps like Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff where there's just so much data that they want to render and load, and it was and the phones in the beginning, the iPhones were really weak, right? So they didn't have that much memory, and the processing was weak. But all of a sudden, like you needed to figure out a way to make these apps work really well for people to keep on building for this platform. So one of the problems that they ran into was that, if we have a table view and we're displaying some images in the table view, if you have a million images to do, I'm not gonna like cache all million of those images in those million cells, because each cell it's an object, right? If we have 100 of those objects, it's going to take up a significant amount of memory, so we can't load all 100 of them, right? So how do we handle like dynamically generating these cells as they appear? Right? That's the way you make it efficient, right? So what they do is, say I have a table view like this. And let's say there's 4 rows in this table view, right? There may be a lot more that we want to load, but we're not loading them now. Every time I'm showing you a table view, I'm only loading the number of cells that you can see plus 2, right? So plus 2 meaning that there's another one here that's loaded, there's another one here that's loaded. If you like slide so that it doesn't like spin, right? So it's going to load, if there a total number of 4 cells can be seen, it's going to load up 6 cells, right? That significantly, limits the number of things you need to load. And the way it kind of works is that there's this thing called the reuse pool, right? And the reuse pool is kind of like, it's like a place where the different kinds of prototype cells can live. Say this is a type of prototype cell. Let's say this is another type of prototype cell. Let's say this is another type of prototype cell, right? So we have these prototype cells here in the reuse pool, and what happens is if you scroll up, right, you're showing this one now. This one is no longer shown, so this guy goes in the reuse pool, right? And then when you're loading it, you take one from the reuse pool and then load it up like that, right? So it's kind of like, it's like recycling. Right, so the cell object is created, but it's just the data in that object is getting replaced as you scroll up. So you're never actually loading more than 6 of these objects at once. You can put different content on there, but it's not hogging up the memory for you having to create like 100 different unique cells, right? And the cool thing about this is that if you have something like, if you have like a Facebook app where sometimes I have text, sometimes I have images, sometimes I have videos, sometimes I have some other stuff, right? Like you can actually, have different prototype cells to handle those different kinds of content. And then when you load it, you can say, hey, if indexpath.row contains an image, load up this one and show the image. If it contains some text, load up this one and then show the text. So it's like really dynamic, right? Question?
So for that format, instead of saying, whatever you called your array dot count, you would do like 6 or whatever, right? Because you only want to load 6 at a time?
No.
How would you limit that? Because if you do
it does it automatically. So the Apple magic here is that even if my array contained 1,000 things, it would only load up the number of things it can display, and it'll do this reuse stuff automatically. So you don't have to worry about it. This is all just like what happens in the behind the scenes. So the way that we use it, all that we do is we give this a name. We just call this my cell, right? And if this was an image, we can call it my image cell, like that, But right now we're only working with this one prototype cell. We're not working with multiple prototype cells. That's a little beyond the scope of this course. But that's kind of like the idea, right? It happens just super efficiently.
So it's always 6 cells? Is that the
No, it's not always 6. It's how many you can display
Okay.
plus 2.
Okay.
So if you have an iPad, it might give you more, but then there's no waste, right? Okay. So we talked about this crazy Apple tech, right? And that's what separates Apple from all the other, smartphone devices, right? They have the software that makes it just work better. Okay. So the last thing I want to do here is just talk about table views versus table view controllers, right? Let's say that, we wanted to change this into a table view controller, right? So let's just go ahead and delete this, right? Let's say we delete that, and now everything's gone. Let's drag a table view controller into our storyboard. We're going to set that as the initial view controller, right? So the arrow comes back. We're going to change our code here from UI view controller class to UI table view controller class. And we can get rid of this because it's table view controller, right? So for table view controllers, they automatically are data source and delegates for the table that is containing. And a table view controller can only contain a table, nothing else, right? So that's what it's used for. Okay, so over here, you're going to have to do the override. It's going to tell you to override because these are parent functions. Right? And then we're going to go to the main storyboard. We're going to set this guy as the bucket list view controller. Actually, we should name this bucket list table view controller. All right, so now we go back to the storyboard. We're going to change this to our bucket list table view controller. Yeah, question?
Just for clarification, when you drag the table, before you did this, when you had the other table view, you dragged it to the view controller. Because initially I put table view.delegate equals self in the view div
Yes.
mode. Is that doing the same thing as when you drag it to the view controller?
Yeah. So the way that you're doing it is programmatically, which is basically like in your code, you have an outlet that refers to that thing in the storyboard. And then using code, you're telling that thing in the storyboard that your data source and delegate are self, which is the view controller. So it's the same thing as dragging.
Okay.
That's the part that the code does. Okay. Okay, so the bucket list view controller, it's a table view controller class. Over here, we set this bucket list table view controller to that class. And we have this one prototype cell here. If we click on that, we can give this guy a reuse identifier. Got to be the same. It's going to be my cell. Okay. And then I think everything should work the same way. All right, let's run it. Yeah, there we go. Same thing. Okay. All right. So the difference is that table view controllers can only contain a table view and nothing else. Normal view controller, you can have a table view in there. You can even have multiple table views in there, right? So this is just to make your life a little bit easier. You don't have to put this thing on top, and this is all it has. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at navigation controllers and segs, right? So in order to embed a navigation controller into our main controller, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. I'm gonna click on the view controller. I'm gonna go up to the editor, and I'm gonna go to embed in. I'm gonna select navigation controller, and you see that this navigation controller was now embedded into this, right? So it kind of sits underneath your view controller, and it's the one that handles all of the navigation stuff when you're transitioning to other scenes. And notice that it created this top bar here for us, right? We can double click on this middle part, and we can give it a name like main, right? Over here we have, these sections where we can drag what's called bar button items onto it. So here we're going to say bar button item. We're going to drag one here, and we're going to call it add. All right? So that's a button I can click. Now, let's say that I have another view controller over here. And if I click on the plus button and hold down Control, I can drag it over, release it, and I can say I'm gonna make it an action seg, right? And there's a few different kinds, right? There's a show and show detail. The show and show detail will have the other view controller slide up, and it'll give you like a back button for free. to go back. The show detail is more for iPad things. If you have two things side by side, the show detail will only cover up one side. For iPhone, it doesn't really matter. Present modally, it'll go from the bottom up, and it will not give you a back button. Okay, and the popover thing is for the iPad as well. So we're just gonna do a show. Okay, so you see the seg here. We can change it to different types if we want to. If we click on the seg, right? And it's gonna, whenever we click on the plus button, it's gonna go to this page, right? So for this page, let's create a label. We're just gonna call this, add page, like that. Right, gonna give it some simple constraints. Let's say it's 25 from here, vertical spacing, and then we're gonna make it center horizontally. There we go. Okay, so if we run this, when we click on plus, it should go to this page. And there should be a back button over here to let me go back to the original page. Right, there we go. Right? Without using a line of code, we just had it go to another page. Now, in the assignment, what it's asking you to do is, oh, and one more thing. For the show segs, it gives you this back button over here. But the thing is that for show segs, the page cannot dismiss itself because it's wired up so that the navigation controller on the main page is kind of controlling the presentation and dismissal of the page. So if you're going to dismiss this page via code, you can't do that in this view controller, right? Let's say you're adding something and after you add it, you want it to automatically seg over. You can't do that. You have to make a protocol for the other page to do that for you, right? And we'll get into that in a minute. For the other types of segs, for the modal, present modally, you can dismiss it because it's literally this page is responsible for showing itself and dismissing itself. But for the show seg, it's the main page that's responsible for doing that, right? So that's just the difference. You'll see, if you want to learn more about it, there's a link over here to all of the different, what's the difference between all of these different segs. All right, so cool. So let's talk about prepare for seg. Okay, so if I wanted to pass some data from this page to the other page that I'm segue into, I guess, I'm gonna have to figure out how to pass data from the source to the destination, right? And in order to do that, we use this function called prepare for seg. All right, and this is a function that you will get. So first thing we got to do is we got to create a new view controller for this view controller, right? So I'm going to click on that, Command N, CocoaTouch class, next, and I'm going to say this is the add item view controller. All right, I'm going to make that file. It's going to be down here, right? Don't need this stuff. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag this over. In the storyboard, I'm going to make this guy that class. Add item view controller, okay? So now the add item view controller is handling the second view controller, right? So let's say for this guy, for this label here, I wanted to print out whatever it is that is on this variable here. I'm gonna name this title text, right? I'm gonna make that equal to add a new item, like that, right? And I'm gonna make an outlet for this guy. I'm gonna say you are a title label, you are a UI label, good. And in the view.did_load, I am going to say title label.text is equal to title text. All right, so it's going to show me this text when I load this page. All right, let's see that happen. showing the right text. Now let's say that when I seg over, I want to send some data from this guy over to this guy and let that, let it show on here, right? So for example, what if we wanted to have something like, hey, if we click on lecture or click on any of these cells, I want to, transition over and show that, right? But I mean, I guess that's kind of out of the scope of what we're talking about.
No.
But I'm going to show you how to do it just using the prepare for seg function first. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, and then later on I'll show you that after I do this. Okay, so the first easy way to do it, right, is that I know that every time I click on this button, it's going to run this seg, right? So right now there's only one seg. So inside of the bucket list view controller, I'm going to create another mark over here, right? And I'm going to call this seg methods, right? And here, if I just type prepare, I'm going to see that it auto-completed me this prepare for seg, right? In this function, this is the function where it's kind of like right before I transition over, I have my feet on, both of the rooms, right? It's kind of like, if you watch The Matrix, it's like the construct, where before they go into the Matrix, they enter this white room, and then there's like rows of guns come out, and they like prepare for, whatever they're gonna do. So here, this is like very much like that, right? Right before we enter into the next view controller, we're in the construct where we can, pass some stuff, where we have access to both this view controller and also the destination view controller, right? So let's say that I have, I'm going to pass some data over, right? Let's say, first of all, we're going to have to create an instance of the destination, right, and save it into some variable. So let's say we're going to let vc equals to seg, which is this argument over here, dot destination, and it knows that its destination is this because it's all in that seg object, right? Seg.destination as add item view controller. We have to downcast it as that specific add item view controller for us to be able to do vc dot and see all of the different properties in that custom view controller. If we don't do that, then we won't get this. We won't get the auto completion, right? So in this case, I'm going to change the title text to be equal to something that says, passing data from bucket list view controller, right? So that's something that I'm defining here, and I'm passing over to the destination. Now, if we run it, we should see that the data that we passed is now being rendered on that label, right? Passing data from the bucket list view controller, right? So we're passing data from the bucket list to the add view controller, and that's using prepare for seg, right? Now, if you wanted to do it so that we clicked on something and then it's segged over, we're going to have to trigger this seg manually via code, right? Because right now, the only way we're triggering that is when we click on the plus button, right? So in order to do that, we're going to have to assign some kind of identifier to this seg so that we can target it. So we click on the seg, we go to the properties little drop down here, we have an identifier, and I'm just going to name it add, I'm just going to name it add. That's good enough, right? So we have an identifier here, and now if we wanted to trigger a function whenever a cell was clicked, that's another table view delegate function, right? So I'm going to say table view, and basically the one I'm looking for is which one is it? It's called did select row at. There, that's the one. So it was the first one. Did select row at, right? And in here, I'm going to do some stuff to seg over, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, we're going to trigger the segue. So perform segue. So perform, there we go. The second one, perform seg with the identifier, and that's the identifier that we wrote. So it's going to be add. And the sender is going to be, what's the sender going to be? Let's make that the index path.row. Okay. Now, this index path.row corresponds to which cell I just clicked, right? So that piece of information is pretty important to me. Right? I want to know which cell was clicked so I can pass in the appropriate data, right? This needs an override because it's a table view controller, right? So now in this prepare for seg, notice that the sender is any. And right now, there's two possibilities for this sender. The first possibility is if the bar button item is the sender. So the type would be bar button item. The second possibility is if indexed path.row is the sender, so that type would be int, right? So, I mean, in any case, we want to create this VC, right? We want to have a constant here with the destination view controller, and we're going to send in the index path.row value if it was triggered by this sender. If it's not, then it's not going to, if it's the plus button, then we're just going to do this, right? So we're going to create condition here if sender is, let's say, int, right? We're going to say vc.textTitle is equal to the, what did we name it? My list at sender, right? Because sender is going to be that integer, right? Okay. So we're going to say if let s equals sender as int, then we're going to do this with the s, right? Because it's an optional, right? We need to unwrap that, and we also need to make it into an integer. So here we can print. Let's just print out sender, right? Or let's put the print sender out here. So if sender is an integer, I'm going to do that, or else I'm going to do this. All right, so let's take a look at what we got. And here we're going to do it safely, right? Because it's an optional, it could be nil, right? So we're going to say nil in that case, right? So now, if we run it, and this is pretty much just the bucket list refactor. I just did it. Yeah, that's like literally what you got to do, right? Okay, so if I click on that, it's going to say passing data from the VC. If I click on this, it's going to show me the name of the thing I clicked, right? So I think we went a little overboard there, but now at least we have this all-in-one kind of lecture plus demo. All right, so that is the prepare for seg. Right, in the prepare for seg, you can pass some data to the destination, right? Now, this is the main thing I want, another main concept I want you guys to take away from today. I mean, I don't want to spend any more than an hour, so we have 15 minutes left, right? So I want to talk about protocols and delegates. And this is one of the concepts that are the core basic concepts that's hard to understand, but it's very, very, very necessary to understand in order to become a real, any iOS developer worth their salt knows protocols and delegates and what they do and how to use them, right? This is a question that we ask external hires that want to become iOS, instructors at Coding Dojo. I will ask him, can you describe to me what protocols and delegates are? And nobody has done that, successfully before, right? So I mean, that's like 101. You must know this. Right? So, and don't feel nervous if you don't understand all of it today. We're gonna have the rest of the 2 weeks before the exam to let it sink in, right? And to be totally honest, I didn't understand it the first time I learned it as well, but now I do, right? So, I want you guys to first of all think about the words, the definition of these words. If I met you in the middle of the street and we were talking, and I was like, hey, you know what? Tell me what a protocol is. What does that word mean? Right? What does it mean?
Or set rules.
There's like some kind of set number of rules or instructions to follow, right? You'll see that, in like cop dramas, they'll be like, we're gonna go do it by the book. We're gonna follow protocol, right? So it's like it's something that is already established, so that you don't have to worry about it and you just follow that guide, right? So that's what a protocol is. And very similarly, that's what it means here. And I'm gonna explain that a little more, right? So, what about a delegate? What does a delegate mean in real life?
You delegate the task for someone.
Yeah, exactly. So if say I had I needed to, let's say grab a charger for my phone, I would say, hey, maybe I'm in the middle of a lecture. Can one of you guys go and grab a charger for my phone for me, right? So I will be delegating that task to whoever it is that will do the thing, right? In the context of iOS, you delegate functions that you cannot do, but something else can, right? So if I cannot do this thing, but I need it to be done, I need to have a delegate to do it for me, right? And in terms of bucket list, right? And I'm going to show you guys, kind of like the general sense of, in terms of this bucket list assignment, what that means, right? So over here, we have this bucket list view controller, okay? Inside of this bucket list view controller, I have this, variable called myList, and it's equal to an array of some stuff, right? Let's say 1, 2, 3, and I'm gonna display this as my data source. Okay, follow so far? Okay, so now let's say I have this plus button up here, and when I click on it, I'm gonna seg into this add item view controller. On the add item view controller, I have this thing like a text field, right? So this guy is a text field. And this guy is a table view controller, right? So it cannot contain a text field. That's why I need to have this guy contain the text field, right? So I'm segueing into this view controller now, and in this text field, somebody types in 4, right? Now, if I want to add 4 to my table, can I do it from this view controller? No, right? Because the array lives on this view controller, right? And the table view lives on this view controller. So all I have here right now is just this data that I want to add, but I can't do anything with that data. So I'm gonna make this table view my delegate for implementing this data, for adding that to the table, right? So I'm gonna make this guy delegate. I'm gonna say, hey, delegate, run this function. Right? So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna create a custom delegate, and I'm gonna make this guy, let's say I have a delegate, right? So in here, I make a new file, and I'm gonna name this add delegate, and I'm gonna say you are protocol, let's say add del, right? Class, and then we're gonna say function func add, and then over here I'm gonna pass in some data. So I'm gonna say item, and it's gonna be string, right? And then that's it, right? So I've created this new this add del custom delegate, and I'm gonna set the bucket list VC to have add del, right? So now that we have this up here, it's gonna give me an error saying that, hey, you said you're add del, but you're not implementing this function here. So therefore, I'm gonna have to implement this function called add that takes in item and it's a string, and then I do some stuff with that string, right? And over here, I'm going to have a constant called, my delegate or something like that, and this is of type add del. Okay, and then it's optional because right now we're not defining it. When we do the prepare for seg, we're going to set this to be self, right? So here we're going to say vc dot my del is equal to self in the prepare for seg function. So then when you go over here now, this guy it's now no longer nil, but it's this view controller, so that when I click on save in this function here, it's gonna run my del dot add, and then I'm gonna pass in whatever string is typed into that input field, right? So I know that's a little bit convoluted, right? But to show you, why you need these delegates, that's kind of how it goes. And I'm gonna write this out real quick right before we leave, so you have it in your code. But if you think about it from a practical perspective, right? It's kind of like the roadside assistance analogy, where if I'm driving and my car breaks down in the middle of the freeway, I'm stuck there. I can't do anything about it. I need to call somebody, my delegate, to help me tow my car or do whatever it needs to do to fix that problem, right? So in that case, my delegate is going to be like AAA, and I am the one who's running a function on AAA. So I'm calling them, telling them you need to do that, right? And AAA needs to know that it's a delegate for roadside assistance, and if it says it is, then it needs to be able to do those things, which is implementing those functions, right? And we need to have an agreement between us, between me and AAA. AAA knows that when I call them, they know who I am and they're going to come out. I need to know which number I need to call for AAA to be able to pick me up, right? So it's like a little contract for delegating tasks between different objects, and you can do this between any two objects, right? Let me just write out this code real quick so you have it here, right? So let's go back over here. Let's create that file. I'm going to create a Swift file. I'm going to name it add delegate. Over here, we're going to go, it's a protocol. It's called add delegate. It's a class, and also the function here is called add. And takes in an item that is a string, right? And that's it. Notice that I didn't do the curly brackets here because here in the definition, all it says is that you must have something. You must contain a function that says add, that takes in these arguments. I'm not going to dictate how you implement that because that is up to the delegate itself, the bucket list view controller, to say what I'm going to do with it, right? So AAA is not going to know, it's not going to be the same for every single car that gets stuck. This car might get stuck over here, the other car might get stuck over there. So it's up to AAA to implement that functionality. But right here, we're just saying that you must at least have that in your body, in your code, right? So this is just saying that it must be there. Now, once we do this, we can go to the bucket list view controller and we can say you are a add delegate, right? And it's going to be green because I've made it myself, right? It's going to give me this error here saying that, hey, you do not conform to the protocol. So we're going to conform to that protocol, right? Over here, we're going to say add, and it'll autocomplete for me, right? Because up there I defined it already. So I'm going to say add item string, and here, what are we going to do with this string that we get? We're going to push it into our table, right? So my list dot append, and this guy is going to be item, right? We're just going to add that, and then we're going to reload the data. Table view dot reload data, right? So then it shows up in our table view. Now, before I do that though, I'm going to dismiss the view on top. So I'm going to say self dot navigation controller dot pop view controller animated true. And remember before when I said in the show segs, you can't dismiss from the destination. You have to do it from the origin, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're dismissing it from the origin. Okay. So in the add item view controller, I'm going to create a constant called add del. I'm going to set that type to be add delegate. It's optional, right? So now in our prepare for seg, we can say, hey, no matter where you're coming from, I want you to vc dot add del to be equal to self. Okay, so I'm assigning myself as the delegate to do the add on the other side. All right, what does it say? Okay, so we're changing. Whoa, what is that? So here, this needs to be a variable, right? Because we're changing it from nil to some other object, right? So we set the relationship over here, and we're going to transition over. And in our here, let's have a button that says, we're just going to put it on the bottom here. Going to give it some color. We're going to call this save. Let's also have input field or text field over here. Give it some constraints, left and right. And then we're going to make the connections, and then we're done, right? So this guy is going to be an outlet called text field, or I don't want to name it that, my text field. So the problem with you naming it the same thing as the type, sometimes it'll conflict with the programming, like the default names, and you'll get errors. So always name it something unique, right? My text field. And this one is just a button, so I'm going to create an action here. I'm going to say handle save button pressed, right? It's a UI button. There we go. Oh no, shit, I created an outlet. All right. We're going to, well, actually, let's delete this. Go over here, make sure you delete that, right? We don't want this to be here anymore. So we're going to create, not an outlet, but an action. Handle button pressed, UI button, there we go. So it's a function, right? When that function is clicked, I want to invoke my delegates method. My delegate here is addDel dot, and notice that it autocompletes for me. The first thing I see is that function, right? So add, and this function here is this function right here. Right? So I'm going to run this function. I'm calling that function now. So over here, I'm going to say addDel.addItem, and the thing I want to pass in is that string, which is going to be my text field .text. Right? I got to unwrap it. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So that's all we got to do, right? And this is going to run that add function It's going to run this function here. It's going to dismiss that view controller on top. It's going to add it to the list, and it's going to reload table view so that the new thing I've added is now a part of that table view, that list of things.
Does this persist data?
No.
Yeah.
Nothing will persist until you implement, some kind of thing that saves it, which is like core data, or there's other ways to do it, but we'll get into that tomorrow. Okay, so here's a text field. I'm gonna type some stuff, click save, boom, there we go. See? Over here, click some stuff, save, right? So we have that, and if we click on it, it'll actually go over here as well, and this will just add the new thing to, in
How do you
addition.
delete it?
Well, right now we can't delete it, right? But there's something that you can do that's one line that will allow you to delete it with a swipe,
Oh, really?
and it's literally just one line of code. Yeah.
But that's not supposed to work that way. That's where you clicked on that and then you added another one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this will add it no matter what. In your assignments in the bucket list, it's gonna say you're gonna edit it, right? So the thing that you see up here is gonna be pre-populated in this field, and then when you click on save, it's not gonna add a new one, but rather it's gonna go back and edit that thing on that list.
And add will only add to it.
Yeah, and add will just add to this array. But spend the rest of the day, work through the table view assignments. Just a heads up, there is like some inconsistencies with the way they name their view controllers on the platform, from the video to the text. So when you see that, don't panic. It's their mistake. Just one of them is bucket list, the other one is add. Right? Those are the two ones you have. Okay. Cool.